Back when I first reviewed The Timeless Children, we probed some of the more meta elements of the story, about the futility of obsessing over canon that have largely been overlooked up until this point. However, there is another layer to this episode we have not yet unpacked, and it all hinges on one very specific moment. Much of the discourse surrounding the brief appearance of the Morbius Doctors has been about trying to rationalise it with continuity, since it doesn't really make sense Jodie Whittaker's Doctor would remember these past incarnations if they were from before her memory was wiped. Some used it as further ammunition to say that the canon is forever broken and Doctor Who is dead, and those were the same people who tried to argue the Doctor shouldn't be female because they've always been male and it goes against established continuity. These are strange arguments to make given that A, lore and continuity don't really matter at all in the grand scheme of things, and B, there have already been countless contradictions over the programme's nearly 60-year existence. My most recent video was on the story Inferno, in which the Doctor leaves the inhabitants of the parallel Earth behind to die because it would, quote, cause a cosmic disaster if he attempted to take them with him. And yet Rise of the Cybermen, Age of Steel, shows Mickey hopping back and forth between parallel worlds and even meeting his other self without causing any harm whatsoever to the cosmos. Both of these are great stories, and neither is hampered by the existence of the other. So what's the deal with this continuity obsession? Well, you know the other week I talked about how bigotry preys upon poor critical thinking. Well, that's exactly what's going on here. See, obsessing over canon is a textbook trait of something which uncritical thinking people do, where they analyse the merits of a piece of media using the same criteria they would with real life. They'll often prioritise things like how believable a character's motivation is over how effectively it is conveyed from a storytelling point of view, for instance. Yes, continuity is important in the real world, but fiction operates on a different realm. It's an artificial creation of an author, and that context has got to be considered. This is where the true significance of that Morbius Doctor's appearance comes into play, because these are not just past incarnations of the Doctor we are looking at here. These are also the faces of the show staff: Philip Hinchcliffe, Robert Holmes, Douglas Campfield. In short, a bunch of middle-aged white males. This crossing and fusing of the boundary between the work of fiction and the context of its creation reminds us that Doctor Who canon itself is not something naturally occurring, but a fabrication, specifically a product of white patriarchy, and the only way to fix that is to crack it wide open, exposing the metaphorical lie of the timeless child. That lie being the notion that straight white male is the default norm, a narrative that has been perpetuated by Western media for so long now that anything else is seen as in some way forced or unnatural. For an example, just look at the reaction to the scene where the Doctor is still a child being experimented on by Tecteun, and is seen switching genders and ethnicities multiple times. I've seen many, including those who should really know better, describe this scene as ticking diversity boxes, and that shows just how deeply the false narrative is embedded. All it takes is one glance at the world outside to realise the very idea of forced diversity is a contradiction in terms, and the fact this phrase exists at all is yet another example of how bigotry exploits mental blind spots. See, just like the Doctor's previous lives, diversity has always existed, but it's only now, after decades of media that has conditioned us not to question why an alien from another planet who can regenerate into literally anything would always take the form of a white male, that we are finally starting to see better representation of that diversity on our screens. Within this meta-narrative, the Doctor becomes an audience surrogate figure of sorts, posing the question of how we as viewers should react to the scary prospect that the world is actually much more diverse than our TV sets have been telling us over the last half a century. Channeling the backlash and the hatred is the Master, who is scared of everything, as the Doctor puts it, and naturally assumes his arch-enemy will be equally afraid and outraged. But of course she isn't, because that's not who the Doctor is. She realises none of this takes away from the other 13 lives she's led that we already knew about. If anything, it only enhances them. Before we finish, I want to just drop in a shout out to Richard Lloyd and his video essay on why The Timeless Children matters. It touches on some similar points and was actually what inspired me to write the script for this video, so if you found what I have to say interesting, I definitely recommend it as further reading. Anyway, I'm Midnight and I just lost my train of thought.